announce our next two programs. We're going to continue to program through June, hopefully, but we only have the following two dates, so let me give you those. On the 15th of February, we're having Transportation Authority of Marin presenting on the latest things going on with TAM. As of now, I believe we have two speakers, the Executive Director, Ann Richmond, and the Director of Planning, Derek McGill. And Kevin, are there any others on the panel that we know of yet, or apparently not? Okay, so that's going to be February 15, and then on March 7, an interesting program, and if you can join us for that, I think you'll have a good time. The program is going to be Gerald Felix Warburg, who is a professor of public policy, I believe is his subject area, at the University of Virginia. Oh, yeah. A Marin guy who moved back east and now has his career there, but he is a researcher on the history of Point Reyes and the National Seashore and the history of that entire chapter of Marin history. And he wrote a book on it called Saving Point Reyes. And it's, I'm in the middle of it right now. It's quite a good book, and he's going to be here to give a presentation about that. So hopefully many of you can be here on the 7th of March and hear Professor Warburg. Just want to do two quick announcements, introductions really. We have two candidates here today. We're here to talk politics, so you're going to hear their names. But I wanted to acknowledge that they are here and they were kind enough to join us. These are candidates for the Republican primary ballot in the District 2 seat for the United States Congress. And so first of all, let me introduce Teef, and Teef's last name is Gibbs. Teef Gibbs, hello.
Hi.
So Teef, as I said, she's running for the Republican nomination for U.S. Congress, and what is your website?
TiefForCongress.com.
And that's TIEF4Congress.com. And our other candidate for the same seat in Congress, Chris Coulomb. Chris, join us. This is Chris from, I believe you live in Sonoma now, you said, right?
Yes, Sebastopol.
Sebastopol, okay. And you have a website, I'm assuming?
I do. It's Chris2Congress, all spelled out, ChrisTOCongress.com.
Okay, so these are your two Republican candidates for that office. They will be presumably facing Jared Huffman, assuming he is successful in his primary, and that'll be an interesting race. And we are very pleased to have you with us, and thank you for joining us. Okay, let's move along. Today you're here to hear about politics. Lucky you. We have our dynamic duo. Oh, yes, the survey, right? Okay, thank you. We have a survey we've given you all. You've seen it on your table. We're just trying to collect a little data on what people's reactions are. If you have a minute, feel free to fill it out and either hand it to one of us or leave it on the table and we'll collect them later. Interested in your ideas about other programs and what you like, what you think could be better. So just a little feedback for us. Okay, so we are here to get an election preview from our favorite two speakers. Everybody knows Dick Spotswood and Greg Brockbank. We've had them here at our podium numerous times, and we're pleased to have them back again today. They'll be talking about races local and national, and then we'll take your questions when they've finished with their remarks. Dick Spotswood is the politics and government columnist for the Marin Independent Journal, the IJ. His columns appear every Sunday and Wednesday. A San Francisco native, Dick is a former Mill Valley City Council member between 1980 and 92, a three-term mayor of that city. He served for 10 years, from 82 to 92, as a director of the Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District, representing Marin's 11 cities and towns. And after 4 decades as an attorney, he has now retired from the law. Congratulations, Dick. Greg Brockbank, another lawyer, a self-confessed political junkie of Marin politics, having compiled candidate lists for over 20 years. Greg is a frequent speaker and writer. He appears frequently on public access TV to analyze and discuss local elections. A 30-year attorney, he is the owner and operator of Marin Law Center and a past chair of the Marin Democratic Party. And he's served on the boards of several dozen civic and political organizations in Marin, including 22 years as an elected official with the College of Marin Board of Trustees and the San Rafael City Council. It is my deep honor and privilege and pleasure to introduce Dick Spotswood and Greg Brockbank.
Thank you. Try that, leave that off. Thank you all for coming. It's a delight to be here. I love doing this. This is it's been a lot of years, as indicated. It's not like we prepared a presentation. It's more like we try to stay on top of this all the time, and then when we come to things like this, we get to tell stories. Is that a good description of what we do here? Anyway, this is actually a short, easy election. My list of candidates, which has a ton of information on it, sometimes they displayed it on the screen here. It's not worth it. It would be too confusing. It's more information than you need. There are 4 contested local races we're going to start with, and usually that takes most of the program, but there are so few that they may not take most of the program, and we can get on to some of the partisan races, which is different, very different. But there are half the races are uncontested, which is about usual, and half the races are contested, and they consist of 2 county supervisor races and 2 city council races, one of which is a special race. The 2 supervisor races are District 2 and District 4. Katie Rice stepping down, and there are 4 candidates we'll talk about at some length. And the other contested race is Dennis Rodoni's District 4. He has 1 challenger. And the 3rd county supervisor up for re-election, Stephanie Mullen-Peters in District 3 in Southern Marin, was not challenged, so she won't be on the ballot. Sometimes they're on the ballot even if they're unchallenged, but I don't think in this case.
The late Hal Brown was a supervisor in the Ross Valley, and I was very friendly with Hal. But Hal was the kind of candidate who was always nervous, no matter what the situation was. And we were having lunch one time, and I said, "Hal, what are you nervous about? Nobody's filed against you." And he said, "Well, there still could be a write-in." So that's the nature of people in politics. You know, they still could. You never know. The 2nd district is I think the marquee race this time in Marin County. Some of you folks may have had an opportunity to see the Coalition of Sensible Taxpayers debate last night in the 2nd district. And I generally have the honor of moderating cost debates, so we had a lot of fun. I'm going to tell you something very, very unusual in this race. There are 4 candidates. They're all top-notch. They're all, after them, I complimented them. You showed respect not just for the voters, but for each other. And one of the candidates even said, well, if he didn't win, he would endorse another one of the candidates. And I met with them all personally, one at a time, and they all speak highly of each other. So this is kind of a very fun race to watch, because they're just talking about issues, not personalities. What a refreshing experience. The candidates are, start with Brian Colbert, a council member and former mayor of the city of of San Anselmo. And he's a person with personal finance background and in the industry as a finance person. Ryan O'Neill is a former Fairfax Town Council member and currently an elected member of the Ross Valley School District. He is in the real estate business. We have Heather McPhail Sheridan. Heather is of the McPhail family. Most of you are familiar with the very large entity in San Rafael, which is a family firm, and she's been very active in that firm over the years, McPhail's. And she is a past member of the Kentfield School District Board, was president of the board. And that leaves Gabe Paulson. Gabe Paulson, another finance background, science background, actually has a real super science background. Gabe is just stepped down, still a councilman, but just spent last year as the mayor of the city of Lawrenceburg. All are experienced, all are well-educated, all are conversant on the issues. So follow the race if you just want to see something that's fun, and that people talking about real issues. We haven't nationalized this race. People talk about the nationalization of politics, where national issues come in and sometimes dominate over local issues. As far as I'm concerned, the big issue there is Ross Valley flood control. That's as local as you get. Any thoughts on the 2nd district?
Yeah, I agree with Dick completely that it's a little unusual that all 4 of these candidates are quite impressive. It's not that sometimes there are candidates that are really bad. It's that more often there are candidates that are just not impressive. but there aren't any of those in this race because they're all knowledgeable and they're all respectful and they're all have good ideas, and I think they would probably be good supervisors. Ryan O'Neill, I finally met. He is, there's a lot to like about him. I just think he has fewer advantages than the others, and I think he's the least likely to make the top 2 runoff. Gabe Paulson seems like a really nice guy, good guy, Larkspur Council. I have the impression from things he's said at events I've seen him at and talked to him about it, is his campaign consists largely of pushing his kid around in a carriage, which is nice, which is admirable, which is good to see, but it's not going to get him as many votes per hour as other methods. So he might not win. Heather McPhail Sridharan, I think, it's hard to pronounce the last name, I think Indian, is an incredibly impressive person, very charismatic and energetic, and was a 9-year, I think, Kentfield school board member, and earned lots of support, and she has 500 endorsements, which is huge, probably mostly from Kentfield, from her days on the school board.
Senator McPhail.
And the Santa Fe McPhails, as you said, and she's wise to continue to use her middle name or family name, is well known. Anyway, she is very impressive. She's got the endorsement of the Marin Women's Political Action Committee, which is one of the 2 major organizations that are county-wide that endorse early, the other being the Marin Democratic Party. And if you get those 2, and often there's one candidate that stands out and they get both of them, and the likelihood of their winning is extremely high. But sometimes they don't endorse, as the Democrats did in this case, because all 4, well, 3 or 4 depending, some of them said they were Democrat and they weren't, and some changed back to Democrat. Anyway, but it's an interesting race. And finally, Brian Colbert, I think should always have been the front runner, give or take Mark Levine. But Brian Colbert is well into his 2nd term as a council member, seems to be well respected by most other council members whose opinions I trust, and has served on a lot of the local committees, which means he's knowledgeable about the transportation issues, about the housing issues, about all the other issues that are important to us. So are some of these other people, but I thought when I was on the college board for all those years that was the major leagues because it was countywide. I was wrong. It was the minor leagues. The major leagues is city council. And when you're on the city council, you're in the major leagues of nonpartisan office, not counting supervisor, which is another level, and the partisan offices, which is another level entirely. But that's why Brian Colbert, I think, has the most and best experience, and I think is the front runner and probably has the most endorsements and the most money. Does that sound about right?
Well, the biggest endorsement he has is the incumbent who is not running, is Katie Rice, and she's endorsed Brian Colbert. This is the first time, she ran 3 times. Katie Rice was appointed upon the death of Hal Brown. So for the district, 2 people, folks, and that's the Ross Valley, good parts of western San Rafael, the Bret Hart neighborhood, down to Greenbrae, parts of Larkspur, Ross, that's the district. San Anselmo, Fairfax, some things, wherever the floodings happens, they're going to be in the 2nd district, and that's the big issue. So that's the 2nd district, Katie Rice retiring, and in the 4th district, that's the so-called coastal district, but the coastal district actually includes the Canal neighborhood of San Rafael, eastern Larkspur, including San Quentin. That's an interesting thing. San Quentin, the only interesting thing about San Quentin, it reflects registration when they draw the lines. Get a bunch of extra people thrown in the district who can't vote. Corona Madera, Homestead Valley, and Incorporated Mill Valley. 2 candidates. Dennis Verdoni, who's the incumbent, passed west, what's the water district over there? North Marin Water District Director, a general contractor in Point Reyes Station, and Francis Juillard. He's professionally a civil engineer, knows a lot about bridges, I found out, and is a member of the Novato Police Advisory Board. 2 candidates, which means, now let's explain the system. It means that race will be decided election night on March 5th, because there's only 2 candidates. Whoever comes in first, that's the deal. In the 2nd district, if one candidate gets 50%, hard to do when there's 4 strong candidates, that one candidate wins in March 5th. But in that unlikely, if that unlikely event doesn't occur, the top 2 people will run off in November. Everybody in the race knows this, so the real race is to see who comes in first and second. And that's where the speculation is. But that's the first, that's the 2nd, and the 4th Supervisorial District, Stephanie Bolton Peters, former Mill Valley Mayor, unopposed, is in the 3rd District. 2 other local elections, one of which is not going to be very exciting. That's the town council race in the city of Ross. 4 candidates filed, and this last week, the Marin Independent Journal was informed by candidate Shadi
Abu Qadir?
that she is no longer campaigning and is not pursuing the race for personal reasons. So it means the other 3, Bill Kirchner, Carrie Dowling, and Matthew Salter will undoubtedly win. This is 3 seats up.
Can I make a comment on that when you get done?
So that's not very exciting. What is more exciting is the Larkspur City Council, because one council member, Kevin Haroff, for personal reasons, decided to move to Novato. You got to live in town to be on the city council. He knew that, and he resigned as he moved to Novato. That means the people of the great city of Larkspur have the honor of electing somebody to fill the 2 years remaining in his term. One person will fill that seat. There are 3 candidates: Stephanie Andre, a finance expert; Claire Paquette, a direct distribution operator. She's in the apparel industry; and Lana Scott. I just rushed to this meeting from the editorial board endorsement interviews of all 3, so ask questions about them. They're still fresh in my mind.
These 2 races may seem minor to some because Ross is so tiny and there's so few people live in it, maybe no one here, and they also are a little more, they kind of keep insular, they keep to themselves more than the larger cities that participate more actively in countywide activities. Ross and Belvedere do so less so. So I don't know most of these people. I did see the one incumbent running for re-election, Bill Kircher, and one of the candidates, Terry Dowling, who has come to 1 or 2 of the candidates forums I've been at for the endorsement committees of the Democratic Party and the Marin Women's Political Action Committee. So I really don't know much. I don't know anything about Matthew Salter or Shadi Abu Qadir. I did not know she had dropped out. One final interesting note. I realize that political parties, and I say this not as a Democrat, which you all know I am, but are not important to many of you. And these are nonpartisan positions. And the Democratic Party is interested in them, obviously, but many or most are not. But you would think that if anybody in Marin would have mostly Republicans, it would be Ross or Belvedere. Of the 4 candidates, 3 are Democrats, and the 1 Republican just dropped out. Stopped campaigning. That's an interesting, unusual.
Well, but you're operating on what we talked about and looked at politics 30 years ago. That's no longer the factor. It makes perfect sense around America that a place like Westchester County in New York, which is often compared to Marin County, I have friends up on in Pennsylvania that live in I can't remember the county. Bucks County, yeah, and I have a friend that lives in Delaware Crossing, Washington Crossing. These are upper middle class communities, which 25, 35 years ago we just put it as a Republican place. And the working class place we see as a Democratic place. Well, who's surprised that Marin County, one of the 3rd wealthiest counties in America, I mean, ever get an education, race, who went to Stanford, race, that kind of stuff. That's the shift. That's now a Democratic county, almost as a given. And a working class case, Monongahela County, Monongahela, Pennsylvania, old steel working place that's had a lot of problems because they don't make steel there anymore. We now presume that's a Republican county. So it's a shift. And it's a sociological shift as much as it is a political shift. And part of that has gone to something which is just the way it is. Politics used to be about persuading people to vote for them. I'm a no party preference, we used to call them, decline the state's independent. That's why I write a blog sometime called The Militant Centrist. But persuasion is no longer really very important in politics. It's getting your voters out. Most people have made their mind up on a party basis. Yeah, maybe not in the city council for Larkspur, but on a party basis. And in Marin County, I kind of poo-poo some endorsements. This is Marin County. 12.2% of the public are Republicans. We presume that most of these candidates are Democrats. Why would I care if the Democratic Party endorsed one Democrat over another? I mean, that's my personal view. I mean, it's just, period. Yeah. And I always presume that both parties, the central committees and the organizers, are on the Democrats, more on the left, and on the Republicans, more on the right. And if you're the militant centrist, neither sounds very appealing. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, let me take issue with a little bit of that. Yes, the Democrats, of course, are very interested in who's running for office, and they interview them carefully, send out questionnaires that are mostly nonpartisan in the nature of their questions. And then we have candidates forums where the questions are, once again, mostly nonpartisan, local issues that are important. And let's dispel any misimpression that many people may have that the Democrats endorse on the basis of who's the farthest left or who's the best Democrat. No. People come forward that we've never heard of before. We're listening to their positions on local issues, which is what they mostly care about and why they're running, and we will endorse the one that we think will be the best candidate and the best council member or office holder, usually based on their local issues. Yes, they have to be a Democrat, and we hopefully they don't have any weird positions that make us uncomfortable about that, but they never do. Anyway, so I just want to make a couple comments about the Larkspur City Council race. One is, it's interesting how you go from seemingly a lot of candidates to very few candidates. And Larkspur is a perfect example of a city that has gone back and forth. It was only, I forget how many years ago, 6? Yeah. That a couple guys were elected to the Larkspur City Council without any opposition. There were 2 vacant seats, and 2 unknown people walked on and serve on the council today that had no opposition. Now, the point I want to make about that is all elected officials, they may not admit it, but most will admit it, that, oh, I got a free ride. Thank you very much. I wasn't challenged. Hallelujah. Oh, campaigning is such a pain. That's true. I can understand understandable human reaction. I've certainly felt it myself more than once. But the truth is, and you all should keep in mind, especially you elected officials or candidates, it's much better to have a campaign. It's much better for you, the candidate, and the office holder, and it's much better for the public. So free rides are shortchanging the public of the right, and that happened 6 years ago in Larkspur when 2 people walked on that didn't have a campaign. Now suddenly we got 3 people for 1 person that resigned. So what's up with my Larkspur, Catherine? Anyway, you'll tell us some other time. The thing I just want to say about Stephanie Andre, Claire Paquette, and Lana Scott is I'd never heard of any of them, but my good friend Catherine Way, who's on the town council, these candidates are all good enough and smart and knowledgeable enough to know that I'm going to go to the incumbent council candidates and interview them and talk to them and see what I can do. And they did, or at least, yeah, most of them. And one of them got the endorsement of one of them. Stephanie Andre got the endorsement of Catherine Way, so that's a really good thing, apparently. Apparently that's very valuable at Larkspur. So it's an interesting race, 3 good candidates. Lana Scott lives in the Skylark Apartments and makes no bones about the fact that she's the tenant candidate. She's the city council. Rent control is an important issue in every city, in Marin and everywhere. But in some cities more than others because they've adopted it and it's being on the ballot whether or not they should modify it, and they're arguing about 5, 7, 9%. I'm a landlord tenant attorney for over 30 years. Anyway, that's an interesting race, and I think, unless you have anything else to say, that pretty much does it for the 4 contested races. I just wanted to mention that not only was 1 county supervisor uncontested and 2 sanitary districts uncontested, but the 3 judges were uncontested, all of which is usual.
Well, let me say something about Lana Scott. She is the tenant. Catherine probably knows this. She is the Larkspur imposed rent control more strict than the state. Is that right? Lana Scott thinks it's still too strict and she wants to bring it down. So she is not only pro-rent control, she thinks Larkspur, which a lot of people thought went pretty far, didn't go far enough. The rent control move in Marin County is being pushed by a group. If I had to pick a group to push an issue, I'm not sure I would pick the Democratic Socialists of America. That doesn't resonate with everybody.
Are YIMBYs any better?
Huh?
Are YIMBYs any better?
Well, they're funded.
But they're also an awkward sounding name that are pushing the rent control.
Yeah, YIMBYs are funded by the technology industry to a great extent, and the real estate industry. They're not exactly a bunch of people hanging around the bar at the corner coming up with, I got a good idea. I had a friend of mine, this is how it works in real life. A guy told me he was involved with Citizens for Adequate Energy years ago. Who's not for adequate energy? I said, who's paying the freight? He says, Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Of course, that's how this works. And so the Democratic Socialists think this will be their way forward. They're going to have a real challenge in Fairfax. If rent control is going to be on the ballot in Fairfax in November, Fairfax is probably the most progressive town in Marin County. There's a lot of opposition to the rent control law in Fairfax. The rumor of recall is out there even. If Fairfax loses rent control, the Democratic Socialists bungled it, because would be a very telling argument. I think that's going to be one of the most exciting races in November.
Let me take issue with your use of the Democratic Socialists. I'm well aware of the fact that they have an odor about them which turns most people off, especially conservatives, but even moderates. That shouldn't be true. Bernie Sanders is the most well-known Democratic Socialist probably in this country, and Bernie Sanders had a huge following, including me, but I don't really know actually any Democratic Socialists here in Marin, except one guy who ran Dan Monte's campaign a few years ago. That's it. Nice guy, good guy, but don't be turned off by the term Democratic Socialists. Bernie Sanders is not only a good example, but how about in Europe, where they are often the mainstream parties and occupy the presidencies of those countries, Democratic Socialists. So it's not some weird far-left thing.
It is some weird far-left thing. But if you really want a treat, go to the Democratic Socialist Marin website. It's a terrific section called the blog. And I just urge you to really read this. The second item of the blog is 600 or 700 words. Imagine that. Devoted to denouncing me. I've been showing it to people everywhere. Take a look at this. You know, so you can judge your enemies now. I don't get that. Also on the ballot, this is a big deal, is Measure A. The Tampines Union High School District, which covers all the high schools from Southern Marin, Central Marin, not San Rafael, and not Novato, and not Shoreline, which is up on the coast, but Archie Williams, Redwood, Tam, and the two specialty schools, Temescal and San Andreas, is the Tampines Union High School District. They have proposed a bond issue for facilities, which the principal will be about $550 million, and with interest payback over the time. So I know interest rates can fluctuate. That's their big defense. The total cost would be $1 billion. That's with a B, which would be the largest ever we faced in Marin. The controversy is it's too big, and the reason is that it takes a lot. There's also so much bandwidth for people's tax paying abilities. If one agency gobbles it all up, and the next day the city of Larkspur has a problem, it's going to be much tougher. They originally had what they call Priority 1 work, which really is essential work. It's about two-thirds of the $550 million in cost. But they expanded to basically everything on their wish list. And the biggest single item is a new cafeteria at Redwood High School. And I mean, the biggest single item. That was not on the Priority 1 list. So if it passes, fine. But if it doesn't pass, the TAM Union directors, in my opinion, should go back, think about what happened, and put the Priority 1 issues on the ballot again and try one more time. But people want to know that you've trimmed as much as you can, in my opinion. You've trimmed as much as you can. And the days, I think, when people automatically vote yes on every school bond, maybe not forever.
I'd like to ask you a question about that, because I'm not as knowledgeable as I should be. I used to live in the district. My mom used to serve on that board. That was decades ago. But I want to talk about the last one. They lost a bond measure, how long ago? 6, 8 years ago? 4?
Yeah.
And that's unusual. In Marin, they usually pass. So what I want to know is, did it fail because it was poorly marketed, poorly presented, it was too big, there wasn't enough need, there was an upsurge of protest and they voted it down handily, as I recall. It didn't get 50%, much less the 60% or two-thirds. Now, has some of that gone away? Are they still fighting that? Is this an improvement? Is enough time lapsed? Is this one going to pass? So it sounds like there's problems with this one.
I think enough time has passed. Voters' memory on local issues tends to be short. And you look at each anew, and there's some very good things about this bond issue. I mean, first of all, you have a fiduciary obligation to fix the leaking roof. And they do have facility problems which are legitimate and in need of real work. We all know, as homeowners, that if you don't fix the roof today, it's really going to cost you a lot of money tomorrow. So that's the other side of the coin. I'm sympathetic to other agencies that have their needs, and it's a pretty big bond. And there's a collaborative nature that should occur. But it's a 55% requirement. It's $30 per $100,000 assessed valuation on your house. That's the tax, which is pretty much of a standard tax, the $30 per 100,000 variation. It's still a lot of money. And what else is on there? Do we have?
I was just going to say, it's so much for taking not too much time on the local races we did, but I do want to spend 5 or 10 minutes on the assembly and congressional races, and then get to control of state races, control of Congress, and the White House, all in the next 20 minutes.
Sure.
Some Q&A.
Do one about the UN too, while we're at it.
Yeah, sure. Any other? You started to ask any other measures that ought to be mentioned other than Measure A. I don't know of any that pop into my
There's
mind.
one statewide measure, Measure 1.
Yeah.
Which is the term they use. I'm going to just say.
Remember, they changed the rules a few years ago so that in the primary, whenever it is, only the legislature could put on ballot measures. All the citizen initiatives, or even the other legislative initiatives, come in November, and there's always a dozen or so of those.
The Behavior Health Infrastructure Bond Act. Not to get into a very controversial topic, but I'm one of the persons that believes that closing the California state mental hospitals in the 1960s and 70s was a disaster for the state.
I agree.
And it had implications that we are still haven't figured out how to turn around. And what we really need is a 21st century version of state facilities to address these needs. We need good, clean, well-staffed places, but are residential. You know, you're not going to, if you know, just where I come from, Morley, if a guy's on the street bleeding to death, you don't just look at him and walk by. You take him to the hospital. And if a person has psychological problems and substance abuse problems is such that they're going to die on the street, you take them to the hospital.
Let's talk about, if we may, the assembly race and the congressional race, however briefly. Usually we focus on the nonpartisan local races, and the partisan races, the assembly and I can turn this on. Okay, you're going to turn that off.
Is that better?
Yeah. As you see, the races, the nonpartisan races are so few, and unless you're in one of those towns or one of those supervisorial districts and are really into this stuff, it doesn't affect most of you. But the assembly district and the congressional races affect everyone. Usually, they have nominal challengers, Republican or not, the assemblyman and the congressman. But this time, Jared has 4 challengers, 2 of whom are here and were introduced to you. And I'm not sure what the reason is for that. I think there's some interesting things going on in the Republican Party, like a lawsuit among the Republican Central Committee members, which are, I have a couple of IJ articles about it, and your column has mentioned it, and I find just highly entertaining. But of course I would. The Republicans would find it highly entertaining if the Democrats were fighting like that. But I just think it's interesting and good that there is a challenger. More than one is better. That just means they got to fight it out amongst themselves. Can I correct something there? Scott, you said they're running for the Republican nomination. That's the old-fashioned way. They're top 2 now. So it's Jared, who's going to be number 1.
My mistake.
And whoever number 2 is, whether they get 40% or 30 or 20 or 10, it'll be those same 2 people. Now, some of them are going to lose because there's 4 of them and only 1 could be the second place. But Jared's going to be number 1. I doubt anyone would be surprised by that, including all the candidates, the Republican candidates in the race. But there will be a top 2 runoff between Jared and whoever the top other candidate is.
Thanks for the correction.
No problem. It's confusing as hell. And the president is different. That's the only one left where we have a primary, which we haven't gotten to yet, and we should, because that's the one everybody's interested in and wants to hear about and has opinions about. I think that I'm going to turn it over to Dick on this in a second. I don't know that I understand why Trump is so popular and why Biden is so unpopular. Maybe I'm in so much of a bubble that I'm missing it, but I try to read everything and I try to understand all this. And I know the Republicans say Biden's boring, and I don't need to say anything about Trump. Everything's been said 100,000 times and it has no effect. So, Dick, what do you think?
Well, first of all, let me just go back to the congressional races and also mention the assembly race, which we glossed over very quickly. In America today, partisanship dominates. If you're in a deep blue district, or if you're in a deep red district, the Democrat's going to win the blue district, and the Republican's going to win the red district. I don't care if you're in the South and you nominated Robert E. Lee as the Democrat, he's going to lose. And Lincoln's a Republican up here, and he's going to lose. It's just, it's the deal in America today. It's horrible. It's part of what's called the Great Reshuffling, where people go into states which they agree with, or areas, and move in. It's an attraction. You're a very populist person. Well, that darn, I don't want to say Dallas because the cities in Texas are different, but Uvalde, John Nance Garner's hometown, you feel quite comfortable. And if you're a Democrat who might be previously in Monroe, Louisiana, and you're moderate to liberal, progressive Democrat, you're going to feel quite comfortable in Palo Alto. So that's part of the reshuffling. And that's why I said before, persuasion isn't the job. Winning elections, if they're possibly contested, it's about getting out the vote. The assembly race is a good example. Damon Conley's the incumbent. He's a former San Rafael councilman, county supervisor, first term in the state assembly. And he's opposed by two individuals, Aaron Cervantes, who is a was a correctional officer, is the proper term, at San Quentin State Prison, and Andy Podoshandley. Andrew owns Trek Wineries in Nevada, was a local guy, and he's a decent guy. I think he would be a good council member, but the chances of getting elected in the Marin Sonoma 12th Assembly District, not great. Some of folks on both the Democratic and Republican side run for office because they want to get elected to the State Central Committee. They'll have a vote. The late Johanna Woolman appointed me as her representative for the Democratic State Central Committee many years ago. This carrot cake is worth more than an appointment to the State Central Committee, in my opinion. You have absolutely no, I like carrot cake anyway.
I agree with you, and I've been doing it for 35 years.
It's a waste of time. I mean, if you don't have anything else to do and you don't want to join Rotary, okay. But it's not where I think politics is about. Politics is about making things happen. I jokingly said, if you really want to have influence in town, join Rotary, become the Rotary president. You're the Rotary president at San Rafael. Everybody's answering your phone call. You know. So I'm not a big one. In my youth I was, but in my older years I'm not so much. Let's move on to one race that we ought to discuss, because it's the one statewide race that people are following, or at least many people are following. Everybody knows Senator Dianne Feinstein served for a long time and passed away. The governor did something very interesting. He appointed a LaFonza Butler, a woman who's lots of qualifications, but certainly part of the deal was she wasn't going to run for the seat. Great. It means that he kept his finger off the scale. That's right off. So I was surprised, frankly, but good for him. There are four candidates. Adam Schiff, the three Congress members. Adam Schiff from Burbank, basically. Katie Porter from Orange County, and Barbara Lee from Contra Costa County. The fourth Republican, there's a Republican, a very strong candidate in my opinion, by the name of Steve Garvey. You might not know Steve, but you're Giants fans, or maybe an A fan occasionally. Steve Garvey was one of the outstanding baseball players for the Los Angeles Dodgers for many years, and then he moved slightly south where he became an outstanding baseball player for the San Diego Padres. In Southern California, Steve Garvey is not a name you have to explain who it is. You don't think of him in terms of politics, but he's a well-known person. He very well, in this top two race, could come in second. It's possible. If that happens, there will be a very big smile on Adam Schiff's face. Because it's a Democratic state, and that's just the way it is. And Schiff they'll be measuring the carpet in the office in Washington. In the Democratic universe, Schiff is the most moderate of the candidates. Barbara Lee is the most progressive, which is the euphemism for the left. And Katie Porter's pretty close, but not quite, to Barbara Lee. Is that a fair
I agree.
In that analysis? So there's a lot of moderate Democrats, what I would call liberal Democrats versus progressive Democrats. Would be just delighted to see Adam Schiff in the race. I had 2 opportunities to spend some time with him. He's an interesting fellow. He's a good friend of ours. So one night she says, "We're having a guest for dinner. Why don't you come over?" It's Adam Schiff and his wife. Yeah, I know, in the city. Anyway, that's the United States Senate race. There's going to be a lot of interest in that. And I think Steve Garvey's, and I credit him for making it a competitive race. He's not particularly issue-oriented, more of who he is, personality kind of basis, which is fine. But it creates some excitement in the race, which is not just among Democrats. So Republicans have somebody, Steve Garvey, pretty good ball player too. That Congressional baseball game is going to be, if he wins, he's a deal.
Just a quick comment or two on that race is one is that
Team player.
I agree that Steve Garvey is extremely well known and probably popular in all of Southern California, but wouldn't that make Northern California, especially Giants fans, hate him if you remember 50 years ago when he was playing for the Dodgers and he was a villain?
Absolutely.
So he will get less votes up here for the extra votes he gets down. I don't know.
If the Democrats are smart and they're worried about Garvey, Buster Posey would have been the obvious nominee.
The polling shows that Adam Schiff, who I think has always been the front runner, is about 28% or something in the last few days. So it's a good, strong lead because the other 3, Barbara Lee is 4th, I think, and Katie Porter is 2nd or 3rd, and Steve Garvey is 2nd or 3rd, around 17, 18, 19%. So they're about 10 points behind Schiff, but they're all clustered with a point or two, and anything can happen to be number 2.
Yeah, so that's a race to follow on election night for a statewide thing. Okay, let's move on to the big time.
Why do you think Garvey's running?
Oh, he's been active in community stuff. I don't know him. I'd like to meet him, and maybe when whoever's number 2. One of the things that a lot of folks who follow this stuff, but it's a distant race, if you will, they're looking to see who's going to be the runoff. And I just had a group from Marin County who's, I won't say who they are, but they were trying to talk about having what they're going to schedule for debates in cost. Debates in November. And the factor is that it's going to be just 2 candidates. And that's operationally, Alan knows, it's a little easier. But anyway, that's that. The big stuff, I'm going to make a really radical prediction here. I don't want to upset anybody in the room, and you're just not going to believe this. But the Democratic nominee for president is going to be Joe Biden, and the Republican nominee for president is going to be Donald Trump. I'm willing to bet my carrot cake on that.
Yes, I agree. I don't know why, but I agree. I wish someone would shed some light, maybe from the audience, Dick, if you're not going to, as to why Biden is so unpopular, because he's boring, because he's old, so is Trump. And why Trump is so acceptable, given 91 felony indictments, given the trials he's currently engaged in, given the convictions he's likely to rack up. Yes, he'll be convicted. Yes, he'll appeal those convictions. Can he stay out of jail between now and November? Maybe. But why would anybody vote for him?
First of all, I'm not as youthful as I once was. I look around the room, and some of you belong to the same communist single-payer health system that I belong to. Medicare, which I love. Both Trump and Biden are older than me. I look at that, oh my God. One of the things that can happen, God forbid, is that at this age, health things happen rapidly. And so, I've known statewide somebody who ran for statewide office, who was a pretty well-known person. This was years ago. And I asked him why. He says, you never know what's going to happen during the general. Somebody could kick off, do something stupid, really stupid, the odd situation, what they call a white swan event. Is that a white swan? Black swan event. And so there's always that. I remember years ago, a name many of you have forgotten, named Phil Burton. Phil Burton was a congressman in San Francisco. He was, I would say, it's just slight of all powerful. And I went to a Sunday morning breakfast with a bunch of people at the Olympic Club at Lakeside. And I get out of the car, and a guy comes running up to me and says, Burton died last night at the Sir Francis Drake Hotel. I had a heart attack. And nobody presumed that was going to happen. Nobody had made their figuring around that, Well, You know, stranger things in life happen than people dying. Bad news for all of you. Sooner or later, no,
That's true, but I just thought, okay, everybody knows that Biden is 81 and Trump is 77. But Biden seems like an extraordinarily good health for 81, and Trump seems like he's extraordinarily bad health just to look at him. I would bet anyone 10-1 that Biden will outlive Trump. So if the danger of dying young, I think rests more on Trump, even though he's 4 years younger.
I'm not a doctor.
Play one on TV.
The only doctor I know is in Nevada. You may know Dr. Insomniac?
Yes.
Yes, he's a medical man, and I would think if you go up to there and have a scuffin, that you will be able to chat with him and see what he thinks as a medical person.
We could talk forever, as should be obvious, but I think we want some time for Q&A about now.
Congress?
If you've got more, go for it.
Well, no, I don't want to deprive the people of the chance to give an opinion, especially on these topics that they may care about the local races, they may, but I bet they care about the presidential race.
I don't think anybody has any questions, do you? Maybe one or two. I'm sure there's lots. Here we go.
I'll turn this off.
Yeah,
It says red.
I don't know what the issue is. I'm going to see if I can turn down the whole system.
Good idea.
Yeah, so...
I just turned this off, so you should be okay on that.
Go for it.
Okay, hi guys. Circling back to the presidential, so if the Colorado thing and these other states that are challenging his right to be on the ballot goes to the Supreme Court and they uphold that amendment, what then? Well, everybody thinks they will or they won't, they might or they... I don't think we know.
I agree. Could you turn that off?
Yes.
Well, we don't know. We do know that the 2024 election will be chaos. We know that. We know Donald Trump has already said it's fixed. But I'm just saying, 2/3 of the people who voted in the Republican primary in the state of Iowa Monday believe that Biden didn't win the election. 2/3. American democracy cannot succeed if a substantial number of people in one of the two parties do not believe the system is legitimate. It has to fail sooner or later. Period. It's a fundamental operating procedure. I don't see that changing. I don't want to tell your investment people, but you might want to go to all the cash. But that is, we're reminiscent of 1861. And if we don't think things like that can happen, we haven't followed history very well, world history. Nothing is certain, nothing lasts forever. It's made by man. But if one of the two parties do not believe that the election system is legitimate, unless they win, then it's legitimate. Trump didn't contest the Iowa vote. He won. But if he lost, he would contest it. And he will contest it in 2024. What the repercussions are nationally, I don't know. But I would, once again, at least get at individual equities.
About the kicking Trump off the ballot, I think I read recently that if the U.S. Supreme Court rules on this, which they may well, it would apply to the entire country. So it's a sort of a yes or no issue. And I don't know what the U.S. Supreme Court will do. They have occasionally ruled against Trump, even though it's 6 members appointed by Republicans and 3 appointed by Democrats. And they have been known to make partisan rulings, but they have also been known to try to uphold the integrity of the court by not looking too cravenly partisan. So who knows what the U.S. Supreme Court will do. I'm not holding out any hope that that's how we'll be saved from Trump, and if we did, there'd be litigation.
It's bad enough for lots of, if you don't believe the election is legitimate, and you don't believe that the judicial system is legitimate at a trial level, then nobody will believe that the Supreme Court is legitimate. So that once again, you're just expediting the disillusionment of the public if he is taken off the ballot. The public expects the right to vote on it generally, but certainly I would think most Republicans would go whack as Democrats would if they took their candidate off. The problem the Supreme Court faces is that if you're an originalist, we're both lawyers. If I'm I'm retired. If you're an originalist and you believe that the real meanings of the word, simple plain meanings of the word as intended by the drafters is the governing, you got a real problem on this issue. Because the drafters had this in mind. And the words are pretty clear. This was drafted after the Civil War, because of the Civil War, which, by the way, was caused by slavery. I know that's controversial.
You know a little more than Haley.
I'm going to put in the paper, I said, who believes we're still talking about slavery? Fortunately, the people of the great state of Mississippi, when they severed their relationship with the Union, in the speeches, one of the leaders said, "Let there be no doubt why this is coming about." And his great quote is, because the institution, the peculiar institutions that was often referred to, is a fundamental part of our society. And so that's no question. Every historian knows that. I mean, it's undeniable. But the point is, there was life was complicated then as it is now. Animosities were great. At least then we were divided into two geographical entities. Today we're divided by sociology, by economics, by profession, by geography. Big city, Democrat, rural, Republican. In between? Yeah, in between.
I want to make a comment about Biden first and then talk about rent control in Fairfax. First of all, I'm Wendy Baker and I actually am running for council in Fairfax in the middle of that controversy in November. The thing about Biden on Instagram, there's a great cartoon with him with his sunglasses. He always looks more cool and more young with sunglasses. And it said, "I may be old, but I get shit done." And I just love that. On the rent control issue, I was a renter for about 25 years in Fairfax, including as a single parent. And I was also a landscape architect, doing internships with different companies. So I would be out of a job every now and then. And I remember in the 70s and 80s having to borrow rent money from a friend. And that was when rents were $300. Today, $3,000 rents, it just hits me in the gut. If you're a young person or a single parent or even a family, and you go with a month without a job and you've got to borrow money for your rent, you're not going to borrow $3,000 from a friend. And so it's all about the 1% and the wealth gap. To me, is what we're dealing with. And these rent control measures don't even really address anything, to me, that's significant. They're talking about a limit every year. And there's the state law that already caps things at 5%. The detailed thing I wanted to ask you about for Fairfax is, we have 1,100 people that signed up to put the ordinance on the ballot in November to throw it out. And I heard that the ordinance that's going to be on the ballot is the original ordinance. But meanwhile, the council has made a lot of changes to it. And they made some good changes. For example, if you're a senior and you want to rent out a room in your house, you can now do that without that tenant controlling your entire life. That's a great change that they made. But I heard that the original was going to be on the ballot. Do you know anything about that? Or could you look into it, maybe?
That's a different question, sure. In Lawrenceburg, the woman I mentioned, Lana Scott, who was the tenant, and who was an advocate of a stronger rent control than they proposed, which is pretty strong, Catherine will tell you. She's proposed an interesting exception. Rent control, local rent control, would not apply to any property it would not apply to any property owner who owned 4 or less units. Because the great worry isn't about the folks that own Skylark, the corporate operation. The great worry is about grandma
Small landlord.
who has nothing wrong with buying a couple of rental units. You know, I'm writing a piece. Despite my last name, I'm really Italian. And you call your mother, your mother's name is Angelina, and your grandparents are no. That's kind of that. But I'm not just Italian. I'm Genovese, and the people from Genoa are very frugal. And what they did, have always historically done, is work very hard, family-oriented, save their money, never extravagance, and use that money to buy real estate. I'm not talking about big stuff.
Yeah.
2 or 3 units here. That sort of stuff to give you some thing. And that's the one who the sympathy is with. Once again, it's not the big corporation that owns Skylark. So I would advise you go to the Democratic Socialist place. They don't really believe that people should own property. Well, go to the page, you know. But those of us who are Genovese people who their grandparents were smart enough to buy a 4-unit place on Octavia Street, as mine did, understand that that's a different situation. And so if I was putting in a rent control ordinance, I would think about having an exemption like that myself. That we addressing the mom and pop and distinguishing between the hedge fund.
Exactly.
Anyway, just a thought.
Yeah, I'm very much against the ordinance. I think it's overly bureaucratic. It does hurt the mom and pop. It hurts those seniors that wanted to rent out a room, but they're now exempt. But it's very hard to be against rent control when you have sympathy for renters. And the way that ordinance was worded, if I was on the council, I probably would have approved it because it was so guilt-provoking. If you didn't go along with that, you were like a real shark against renters. Anyway, it'll be real interesting. I'm glad you mentioned Fairfax as the sort of test for the county.
Italians aren't into guilt. That's an Irish thing.
Okay, I don't know what is with the mic. We turned it down. Question over there. Me.
Thank you. I'm Emily Yulhorn, and I'm on the TAM District School Board, and I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that were said about Measure A. The first being, as Dick said, it's $30 per $100,000 of assessed value, which is dictated by the state, and it's the same number as the bond that passed in Sausalito, Marin City a few years ago that was a $41 million bond. It's the same number to the taxpayers as recent bonds passed in San Rafael. So the fact that it brings in $517 million to the district is really a virtue of the size of the district, not a virtue of an undue tax burden on our taxpayers. So for the average taxpayer, it's $300 per year for the average homeowner in our district, which I think is important to know. Also important to know that we have bonds that are rolling off that will offset that. So bonds that are currently being paid, people will be paying less. And then also just to note, we did not have a bond that didn't pass. We did have a parcel tax that didn't pass. It got 63% of the vote. And then in the subsequent vote, it did pass. So we take it very seriously when we ask our community for support. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple things and encourage people to look at the facilities master plan. The cafeteria is part of it as food services, as the state mandates that we feed free lunch to all of our students as well as free breakfast. So we're feeding 250% more kids now than we used to be. And this is really a once-in-a-generation bond, so it takes care of all of the facilities needs for the next 15 years. And frankly, I think we would be irresponsible if we waited on those, years 6 to 15 needs, because the escalation costs are so much. So by planning now and being ready to break ground if this passes this summer, we actually will save the taxpayers just on 2 of the projects $26 million. So time saves money, and we've been very planful, spent 2 years looking at this. So it is certainly a large number when you look at the revenue, but it is a very standard number to taxpayers.
Thank you for correcting me on that. I just wanted to correct too that seems to be the only controversy, if you read the paper, is that the opponents to this new tax are complaining about not sufficiently or prominently enough mentioning the interest, which would bring it from a $500 million cost to a $1 billion cost. But it seems to me that information is always required and is in fact put in the ballot, sample ballot statement and the ballot measure question. It just may not be as, and sometimes they portray it prominently, sometimes less prominently for obvious reasons, but I don't think that they are guilty of hiding it.
Well, I don't think anybody says it. The question was, should it be in the ballot, the line that everybody reads, or in the multiple pages? It's certainly in the multiple pages, but certainly not in the line which everybody reads.
Next question over here.
Actually, I'm going, my name's Annie Sherman. I'm also a school board trustee, and I'm also the campaign co-chair for Measure A. And I just want to directly challenge what Dick Spotswood just said. You actually did impugn the character of the TUHSD trustees, and you did suggest wrongdoing, and you used the word that they purposely left out the language. That language, I would ask, I hope, I'm a 22-year daily reader of the Marin IJ. I've gotten it delivered to my home since 2005 when I moved here from the East Coast. I have always been impressed, Dick, with your reporting, the way that you look at both sides of an issue and bring pertinent details, and you also simplify complex topics. I really appreciate that. I have been woefully disappointed to find with your coverage of the TAM Union Measure A since the very beginning months ago. My impression is that that it's very likely that you have not been doing your own homework, but that you have been looking to and only to your good friends at cost in bringing this topic to the paper, and I find it very disturbing.
Well, I just happen to have had breakfast this very week with the woman sitting next to you. And in fact, unfortunately, that sounds kind of harsh to say that you willfully let it out. I don't think that's a matter of integrity. It's a matter of political strategy. That's why you left it out, because you didn't want to have that large number in the line that everybody was going to read. And my job is not to be a reporter. I am not a reporter. I give my opinion. That's why on the top of the page the word opinion appears. It is my opinion. You want to read the story that's very balanced this side and that side, that's called reporting. And so I gave my opinion that there should be disclosure when interest amounts that high. I'm well aware, as a person who's been in politics most of my life, that that sort of thing is a killer. You put the term $1 billion in the first line, and a lot of people are going to say, hell no.
Can I respond?
Sure.
I think that anyone who is in finance with any sort of background in finance knows that never in the history of bonds have bonds ever been categorized based on their total debt service. It's always on the principal. I'm not saying that you shouldn't pay attention to that number, but in fact, San Rafael came in with their bond in June of 2022. It's a $212 million bond that charged the taxpayers exactly the same rate as the Measure A bond, and actually Cost took an official neutral position on that bond. Lastly, I also want to point out, and as far as, anyhow, I also want to point out that anybody who, the 104, I'm sure this is going to come up, the gold-plated cafeteria, $104 million at Redwood. $104 million is actually for 5 new buildings, not one cafeteria. And in fact, if you go over to San Rafael High and you go over to Terra Linda High, and then take a trip over to Redwood High School, you will be shocked at how beautiful the student commons area is at both Terra Linda High School and at San Rafael High School. They have what's called the new Max Center. Just something that I think the voters should know.
All right, anything follow up on that, Dick? Or are we
No,
ready? Okay.
A dialogue is not the right place. This is not the right place for a dialogue.
Thank you both for the clarifications.
Well, perhaps changing the topic a little bit here. So, as always, I'm impressed, I imagine most of us are, with the acumen, the political acumen of Greg and Dick. I have the pleasure of attending Rotary sessions with Dick, and when he speaks, I always try to listen. But I'm a little confused about something. Both of you are so bright in the area of politics. I'm amazed that there's some confusion about why it is that people vote for Trump or Biden. I have a theory.
Maybe only on my part.
I have a theory that it's mostly an emotional issue. It's not an issues-based. But I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about why it is that you think that people vote. And maybe not just for Trump or Biden. I think many people in this room would, or at least one, me, would prefer that there were two different candidates altogether to vote for, where it would be more of an issues-oriented election. That's not going to happen, I agree. But what's your thinking?
We're in a era, a time of great change, sociological change. I mean, I could tell you 25, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, if you had asked me if I thought the same-sex marriage was a good idea, I probably would have said no. I've attended many same-sex marriage ceremonies of friends of mine. I don't have that position anymore. I think here's what I think on that. God made us all. God loves us all. And he made gay people and straight people and everything in between. And he did that for a reason. He hasn't told me exactly why he did all that stuff, but he did it. And he loves all those people. And if he loves them, I should love them. That's my idea on same-sex marriage. On the other stuff, we changed a lot. The economic basis of 1950s and 60s were seen as the halcyon, did I say it right? Halcyon time. For some in America, pretty much you had to be a white person to be in that halcyon time. We're having a speaker at Rotary coming up. I'm going to put this in the paper, not just to promote Rotary. There's a woman, I don't have her name, but she was the first black school teacher in Mill Valley. She will be speaking at Mill Valley Rotary. She was threatened. She had to be escorted from her home in Marin City to Mill Valley to school by the police. And that life was very difficult, but she had guts. Oddly, one day, while walking across Miller Avenue, she's spotted by a professional photographer who takes her picture, thinks she looks great, and submits it to the advertising agency in which she works for. She became the national figure used in Coca-Cola advertisements very quickly. At that point, instead of having the parents being outraged that they had the first black teacher in Mill Valley, people were begging to put their kids in her class. Well, some evolution is good. It's slow. We've been too slow, but that's good. But imagine the first black school teacher in Mill Valley. And she couldn't live in Mill Valley because nobody would sell her house. Those are bad things. And we made some progress. Those are difficult times. You go through that. There's been a lot of stuff lately about looking back at the 50s and 60s. And for me, it was great. But, I was lucky. Times have changed now. Economically, the old blue-collar worker who really valued his esteem and was treated with respect and had a good job with, he could live, support a family on, that's no longer possible. Now, you've got a new economy. You've got new people coming in. I recently sold my house to a young couple that wants to have a child for a lot of money. And she's a English barrister coming to practice law in the United States, and he's a high-tech developer. There's new jobs that are presenting new stuff that have great wealth and great job opportunities. Life has changed, but there's winners and losers in that. And a lot of the folks, especially in those Rust Belt states, they don't feel like they were treated with respect, and they don't feel like it ended up very well for them. And they're upset. And they're really not sure how to respond to it. But this is one way. It's visceral. And it's not about issues per se. And they don't have a brilliant plan. There's no plan. And I don't think it's really so much about Biden personally. But Trump they see as their avatar. He's doing what they would do. That's my own view.
You asked for our personal thinking on it. It's hard for me. You'd think that we all have a million opinions, me more than most, on presidential candidates, major, well-known presidential candidates like Biden and Trump. I really am clueless on Biden, but I have noticed that presidential candidates always have lower than expected polls, and that's because, as we all know, practically all Democrats overly vilify any Republican president or Republican presidential candidate, and Republicans overly vilify Democratic presidents and presidential candidates. So you've got these two camps of people that hate the leaders of the other party, and that's why Biden's poll numbers are dragged down, I guess. Now Trump, the only thing I can figure, and it doesn't make sense, but it's the only thing, it makes more sense than anything else I can think of, is that as a Democrat, I believe in government. I believe we are becoming more progressive slowly. The demographics show it in young people. And we're, as a society, becoming more complex as government takes an ever larger role in trying to make life more fair. Now, I know Republicans don't like this. There's a lot of you out there. But that's, I think, what's happening. And people are getting frustrated with that, and they're looking for somebody to blow up those boxes. Remember why they liked Arnold Schwarzenegger? Because he promised to blow up the boxes. That's the popular attitude about government. It's too full of too many boxes, so we need somebody to blow them up. And that's why he got elected. I think they think the same thing about Trump. We need somebody to blow up the boxes of government because government is inherently evil. And by God, Trump's the man to do it.
I voted for Schwarzenegger.
I'll take culture wars for 50. Are we moving on, or you one last thing, Dick? All right.
Moving on.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Dick.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm Kingston Cole. I'm on the board of directors for COST. And I got to just correct you a little bit on what really happened. We did beg you and ask you every which way to bring up that $1 billion number. It is vital to the transparency, all right, of government, all right, that you explain what the true cost is. As to the actual cost per person over 30 years, we ran a calculation. It's about $18,700 for a $1.5 million house in the district, which is about the average, okay? We really, your idea of essential buildings, all right, the gold-plated cafeteria, we went along with Summerfeld because they kept it to the essential thing, the essential items. You've got your wish list, all right? If you kept it to the essential items, we would have supported you. If you put that $1 billion up there, we probably would have supported you, okay? All right. I did an investigation on going up on the California school dashboard, all right, on how the Tammany United Schools are doing. Wrote a letter to the IJ about it. In terms of math and English, you're doing a horrible job of teaching these kids. All right? Your grades are horrible. Tam High School gets an F, a red, all right, for math. You're not educating these kids. If you don't do better about educating them, we are always going to oppose you. All right? So money aside, you got to do a better job in the long term. Thank you very much.
All right. I want to make sure we don't get bogged down. If we can get everybody else's questions in, if there's time, we can go back to you. But we have one over here.
Scott, I want to bring up something not controversial. This is too controversial. Let's talk about Israel and Hamas.
Good point. I don't think public.
No, I'm kidding. No Israel, no Hamas. No. Today.
I'm Fritz Muller. I'm a retired child psychiatrist, and a lot of my work was trying to help kids that were too aggressive, help their parents, help them not be so aggressive, to learn to stop and think. And I think all of us, human nature-wise, have a lot of aggression inside of us to manage. It'll be, many millennia before our nervous systems evolve, or we start eradicating or modifying it, with CRISPR. But I think that the advance of IT and the ability to flash aggression and threaten other people and offload the aggression with iPhones and all of that has made a huge impact. And, we didn't have to listen to or know about all of this aggression publicized like we do now. And I think that has an impact on all of us.
Certainly.
Thoughts on that?
I agree 100%.
Oh, here we go.
Bill Lindquist is my name. I've lived along with my wife in the US for 50 years. 30 of those years in California, here in Marin County, in the little town of Tiburon. And we love everything about the place. We're brought up in New Zealand, and in New Zealand, when it comes to the voting of local councils, hospital boards, water supply boards, sewage boards, and so on, candidates very rarely say what political party they belong to, because their job is to look after the nuts and bolts of running the local cities and so on. And if they were to declare their political affiliations, as seems to be the case here in the good old USA, they can't help but be influenced in their actions and decision making by national policies, which may or may not be relevant to where they're living. As just one example, little old Tiburon, 8,000 or 9,000 people, our roads are screaming out to be maintained, and here's the council spending an inordinate amount of time on climate change policy. It's a total waste of money and totally irrelevant. Just a comment.
I do have some responses to that. I understand your feelings. These local offices are mostly nonpartisan for a reason. I agree with those reasons, and I agree with where they draw the line at becoming partisan in the state legislature and Congress. But every group in the world has a right to endorse a candidate for any office. The political parties should be no different. There was a while, about 20, 30 years ago, where political parties were prohibited from endorsing local candidates. That is no longer true. They can endorse like everybody else. And they can, and they do. And as I mentioned earlier, they're often endorsing on the grounds of who would make a good candidate, not loyalty to the Democratic Party. And I don't know that they are overly influenced by national policy. I bet if you asked 100 local county supervisors, city council candidates, school board members, and special district elected officials, none of them would admit to being influenced by local national policy. And I don't think they are, whether they're Democrat or Republican. But the last thing I'll say is that we all subscribe to certain philosophies in life. Many of our philosophies align more with one party or another, so we join that party. You don't have to tell anybody what party you've joined, but some people do, but not many. Most people run for office, they never mention the party, and nobody cares. You're right. But if you want to tell your party, you can. And if people want to know, they ought to be able to know. And if parties want to endorse, they ought to be able to endorse.
Well, there's a difference between the freedom to do something and the wisdom to do something. I can remember many years ago when I was a city councilman, I was a registered Democrat in those days, and the Democratic Central Committee announced the good news. They were going to endorse candidates for the city council race. I was running again. I said, hell's bells. That's the last thing I want. I have a lot of friends that are Republicans. I don't want to be endorsed by the Democrats. I don't want to be endorsed by the Republicans either. I just wanted to keep things the way they were in a nonpartisan place, and period. And so I think I turned it down. And yeah, you absolutely have a freedom to do it. Period. Should you do it? Certainly, I don't think helps the system.
All right, probably have one more question. Time for one more. Anybody? Okay. We'll squeeze this in. I think maybe the battery in that mic is running down.
Exactly right. It's red.
Hi, this is going to be more of a public service announcement. I'm going to back up so everyone can see me. My name is Todd Greenberg. I live in Fairfax. I can answer some questions for anybody who has questions. I can debunk what the DSA said that leaves many things out in their reply to Dick Spotswood. I'd like to add a couple of facts. The public service part of this is that you can go to marinresidence.org or fairfaxresidence.org to learn all about what's going on with rent control in a very impartial educational way. Additionally, to give fair time on the other side of the coin, the local DSA chapter headed by Kurt Reese does offer, apparently, at least they used to have it on their website, free classes in Marxism to anybody who is interested in that. A little additional information. The rent control laws that the DSA managed to pass without stakeholder input, without notice to people, to property owners in Fairfax were the combined strictest in California rent control laws. Not that anybody doesn't want to help everybody out, but they were the strictest in California combined, both a rent stabilization, as they call it, and a rent just cause eviction ordinance. That Chance Cutrano, mayor at the time, insisted on including, with Kurt Reese's constant refrain, that there be treble damages for landlords. So many things don't get reported in the press adequately. I'm happy to provide any information, but if you don't get a hold of me, please remember Marin Residents and FairfaxResidents.org. Thank you.
All right, I don't know if you've got any reaction on that. If not, I think we're ready to wrap up. Okay, well, look, again, very engaged discussion here today, and I really appreciate everybody coming and sharing your thoughts. You have had a chance to do your surveys, just leave them on the table and pick them up. If you haven't had a chance and you want to, go ahead and jot down your notes. We could probably go on another hour, and it would be entertaining and informative, but we got to stick to our schedule. Thank you all for coming. Don't forget, we've got February and March, and those will be on our website, marincoalition.org. Thank you to our panelists.
You thought I was kidding about my sign, we'll talk politics for food.
Yeah, exactly. All right, and thank you all for coming. Thanks our candidates for sharing your views with us, and we will see you next time.